There have always been mysteries that challenge our understanding of the world, events that seem to defy reason and make us question what we know about reality. One of the most baffling is how certain individuals can foresee events long before they occur. How is it possible for someone to predict things that haven't even happened yet? Is it a divine gift, an inexplicable connection to a higher power, or something that science will never be able to explain? Today, we delve into the story of Padre Pio, a man whose ability to see beyond the present stunned the world. His visions were so eerily accurate that many believed he had been blessed with the gift of prophecy. Some of his revelations saved lives, others prevented disasters, and a few continue to send shivers down the spines of those who learn about them even today. Before we dive into the astonishing details of his story, take a moment to do something that could bring peace and blessings into your life. If you believe in faith and divine guidance, write, "I trust in God" in the comments to show your devotion and invite spiritual protection. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear is something you won't want to miss. Now, find a comfortable place, clear your mind, and prepare yourself for a journey into the life of a man who defied all logic, a man who had the rare ability to foresee the future with uncanny precision. Throughout his lifetime, Padre Pio demonstrated an extraordinary gift, one that was difficult for most to comprehend. His predictions were not vague or generalized, they were precise, accurate, and undeniable. Time and time again, his words came to pass, whether he was warning someone about an impending danger, revealing hidden truths, or offering guidance to those lost in their struggles. His abilities placed him in a unique position within the Church, drawing devoted followers who saw him as a messenger of God, as well as skeptics who desperately tried to rationalize what seemed impossible. From an early age, Padre Pio displayed a remarkable connection to the divine. Unlike other children who spent their days playing, he was often found immersed in deep prayer. He dedicated hours to silent meditation and claimed to receive visions that contained messages beyond human comprehension. These were not mere feelings or instincts, they were detailed revelations that, in time, proved to be eerily accurate. Those who sought his wisdom were often left speechless when they realized that he knew their concerns before they even spoke. Without hearing their stories or receiving any information, Padre Pio could describe their struggles as if he had lived them himself. It was as though he could peer into the depths of their souls, perceiving not only their thoughts, but also events that had yet to unfold. One of the most astonishing aspects of his ability was his power to foresee danger. On multiple occasions, he warned people to alter their plans, avoid specific locations, or take precautions against unseen threats. Those who heeded his advice often avoided tragic fates, while those who dismissed his words sometimes met disastrous consequences. But his extraordinary gift extended beyond predicting events. He had an uncanny ability to perceive the spiritual state of individuals as well. During confessions, he would often reveal sins that the person had never admitted out loud. He could identify the burdens weighing on their hearts and guide them toward redemption, offering not just forgiveness but profound spiritual insight. This ability made him a deeply revered figure, yet at the same time, some feared him. He never sought to impress or frighten anyone with his abilities. His only purpose was to help people find their way back to God and live a life of faith. Despite the skepticism of some, the overwhelming evidence of his abilities could not be ignored. Even within the Church, where his gifts were initially met with doubt, those who investigated his life often found themselves unable to dismiss what they witnessed. Over the years, stories of his predictions spread far and wide, attracting thousands who traveled great distances just to receive his guidance. Yet, despite the fame that followed him, Padre Pio never took pride in his extraordinary abilities. He made it clear that his visions were not a personal power, but a divine gift, something entrusted to him for the sole purpose of serving others. To him, his ability to see the future was not meant for personal gain or recognition, but rather as a means to guide souls toward salvation. Even after his passing, countless testimonies suggest that his presence is still felt. Many claim to have received signs or messages during moments of despair, as if Padre Pio continues to watch over those in need, guiding them as he did in life. His story is one that continues to baffle even the most skeptical minds. How could a man possess such an extraordinary gift? Science may never be able to explain it, but for those who believe, there is no doubt that his life was a testament to the mysteries of faith. From the moment he was born, it seemed as though Padre Pio was destined for a path of deep devotion. He entered the world on May 25, 1887, in the small southern Italian town of Pietrelcina. His birth name was Francesco Forgiani, and he was raised in a humble yet deeply religious household. His parents, Gracio and Maria Giuseppa, were simple people, but their faith was unshakable. It was his mother who first introduced him to prayer, igniting a love for God that only grew stronger as he aged. While other children spent their days playing, Francesco found himself drawn to moments of solitude, where he could pray and reflect. By the time he was just 5 years old, he had already expressed a desire that was highly unusual for someone his age. He wanted to dedicate his entire existence to serving God. Unlike most children who dreamt of adventures, excitement, or play, his only wish was to follow the Lord. Even in his youth, Francesco experienced profound spiritual encounters that went beyond human comprehension. He claimed to see Jesus, the Virgin Mary, and his guardian angel as clearly as he saw his own family members. To him, these interactions were as real as any conversation he had with people in his everyday life. He didn't question why he was granted these experiences, he simply accepted them as part of his existence. However, not all of his visions were peaceful. He also spoke of terrifying encounters, moments when dark forces tried to shake his faith. He described how the devil appeared to him in horrifying forms, attempting to instill fear and doubt within him. But even as a child, Francesco was unwavering in his devotion. Rather than succumbing to fear, he prayed even more fervently, seeking refuge in his faith. His mother noticed that he was different from other children and encouraged him to embrace his calling, believing that God had a special purpose for him. As he grew older, his spiritual connection only deepened. By the age of 8, he was already spending long hours in church, lost in prayer and silent communication with God. When his family recognized that his vocation was genuine, they chose to support his dream of becoming a priest, setting him on the path that would lead him to become the man the world would later know as Padre Pio. His journey was only beginning, but even in those early years, it was evident that he was unlike anyone else. His life would go on to inspire countless believers, leaving behind a legacy that continues to challenge our understanding of faith, destiny, and the unseen forces that shape our world. There was one significant obstacle that stood in the way of Francesco Forgiani's journey toward fulfilling his spiritual calling. His family lacked the financial resources to support his religious education. The Forgiani household was deeply devoted to their faith, but they struggled to make ends meet, and sending their son to study as a priest was an expense they simply could not afford. However, his father, Gracio, refused to let financial hardship stand between his son and his divine purpose. Determined to give Francesco the opportunity to pursue his vocation, Gracio made the heart-wrenching decision to leave his family behind and immigrate to the United States in search of work. With great sacrifice, he took on laborious jobs in a foreign land, enduring hardship and loneliness, all so that he could send money back to Italy and fund his son's studies. Thanks to his father's dedication and unwavering support, Francesco was able to take the first major step toward his spiritual journey. At the age of 15, he was admitted into the Capuchin novitiate in Morcone, where he officially dedicated himself to religious life. Upon entering, he took on a new name, one that would define his identity for the rest of his life: Padre Pio, chosen in honor of Saint Pius. From the very start, he stood out among his fellow novices. His discipline, relentless devotion, and deep love for penance distinguished him from the others. While many found the strict monastic routines challenging, Padre Pio embraced them with an unshakable resolve. His greatest desire was to grow closer to God, and he believed that spiritual discipline and sacrifice were the paths to achieving that connection. Yet, his journey was anything but easy. Throughout his training, he faced constant physical suffering. His health was fragile, and he endured severe illnesses that left him weak and fatigued. Despite the physical toll, he never once complained or allowed his suffering to deter him from his path. No matter how difficult things became, he remained steadfast in his commitment to his faith. During this formative period, Padre Pio's spiritual practices intensified. He spent entire nights immersed in prayer, fasting for long periods, and practicing extreme forms of penance, convinced that suffering brought him closer to Christ. His unwavering devotion did not go unnoticed. His superiors and fellow friars were deeply moved by the peace and humility he radiated. There was something extraordinary about him. His presence alone had a calming effect on those around him, as if he carried with him an unexplainable connection to the divine. It was during these years that he first experienced the early signs of the stigmata. Though his body bore no visible wounds at the time, he described an intense pain in his hands, feet, and side, the same areas where Christ had been pierced during the crucifixion. For many, such unexplained suffering would be distressing, but Padre Pio saw it as a gift. He believed that he was being allowed to share in Christ's suffering, and he embraced the pain with humility and gratitude, never questioning why he had been chosen for such an experience. From childhood, Padre Pio's life was marked by extraordinary events. His mystical visions, unwavering devotion, and profound longing to serve God set him apart from others. His story serves as a reminder that divine purpose often reveals itself early in life, and that no challenge, no matter how great, can stand in the way of someone destined for a higher calling. At the age of 15, Francesco Fergiani made the decision that would shape his destiny. He entered the novitiate of the Capuchin friars in Morcone, Italy, where he officially became Brother Pio in honor of Saint Pius. His devotion and spiritual discipline were evident from the beginning. Unlike many of his peers who struggled with the rigorous demands of religious training, Padre Pio embraced every challenge as an opportunity to grow closer to God. However, his journey to the priesthood was fraught with hardships. From an early age, he had suffered from various ailments, frequent fevers, severe respiratory issues, and unexplained pains that drained his physical strength. His fragile health often made it difficult for him to carry out his duties, but despite the suffering, he never wavered in his commitment. He believed that every hardship he endured was a way to unite himself more deeply with Christ's suffering. With remarkable spiritual strength, he continued to push forward. He spent long hours in prayer, fasted regularly, and engaged in acts of extreme penance, convinced that self-sacrifice was essential in deepening his faith. On August 10, 1910, at the age of 23, he achieved the greatest milestone of his life. He was ordained as a priest at the Cathedral of Benevento. It was the fulfillment of everything he had ever dreamed of, the moment he had worked so tirelessly for. However, his physical health remained fragile. Shortly after his ordination, he was forced to return to Pietrelcina to recover. During this time, his mystical experiences intensified. He spoke of divine encounters, visions of Jesus, the Virgin Mary, and his guardian angel. But he also faced darker experiences. He described terrifying encounters with demonic forces that sought to weaken his spirit and pull him away from his mission. Yet, no matter how great the temptation or fear, his faith never faltered. In 1916, he was reassigned to the monastery in San Giovanni Rotondo, a small town that would become his home for the rest of his life. From the moment he arrived, people could sense there was something different about him. When he celebrated Mass, those in attendance described a profound sense of peace, as if they were in the presence of something divine. Then, on September 20, 1918, something happened that would change his life forever: the appearance of the stigmata. While deep in prayer in the monastery's choir, he had a vision of the crucified Christ. In that moment, he felt a searing pain, and when he looked down, He saw that his hands, feet, and side bore the same wounds that Jesus had suffered on the cross. This phenomenon defied all logic. The wounds never healed, yet they did not become infected. For the next 50 years, they remained on his body, bleeding constantly and causing him great pain. This miraculous occurrence further cemented his reputation as a man of extraordinary faith, but it also drew skepticism. Many within the Church sought to investigate his wounds, hoping to uncover a scientific explanation. However, medical examinations could find no rational cause for them. As his fame spread, thousands traveled to San Giovanni Rotondo just to see him, hoping to witness a miracle or receive spiritual guidance. He dedicated himself to the service of others, spending up to 16 hours a day in the confessional, listening to the confessions of the faithful and offering them counsel. It was widely believed that he had the ability to perceive a person's sins before they even spoke, a gift that left many in awe. Beyond his spiritual work, Padre Pio was deeply committed to acts of charity. In 1956, he founded Casa Salvo della Sofferenza, a hospital dedicated not only to medical care, but also to compassion and faith. He believed in healing both the body and the soul, ensuring that those who came for treatment also found spiritual solace. Despite his declining health in his later years, he never stopped serving those in need. On September 23, 1968, Padre Pio passed away in San Giovanni Rotondo, clutching his rosary as he took his final breaths. His last words were simple yet profound: Jesus, Mary. Today, his tomb remains a sacred pilgrimage site, visited by millions who seek his guidance and blessings. His legacy endures, a testament to the power of faith, sacrifice, and the mysteries that transcend human understanding. Even after his passing, his life continues to inspire, reminding the world that miracles still exist and that divine purpose knows no bounds. Despite relentless medical examinations and extensive studies, no doctor could provide a definitive scientific explanation for what was happening to Padre Pio. The most astonishing aspect of the phenomenon was that the stigmata never became infected and showed no signs of healing, something that defied all known medical knowledge. Wounds of such magnitude, especially ones that bled persistently, should have eventually led to complications, yet his remained open for 5 decades without causing any infections or serious damage to his health. For Padre Pio, these wounds were not a badge of honor, nor did he see them as something that made him superior to others. Instead, they were a source of immense pain both physically and emotionally. He never sought attention for his suffering, nor did he desire to be viewed as someone extraordinary. If anything, he longed for the opposite. He fervently prayed to God, asking for the ability to endure the pain without the visible marks on his body. However, it was not his decision to make divine will had already determined that the stigmata would remain, serving as a testament to his unbreakable faith and deep spiritual connection with Christ. From the moment they appeared, the wounds became an undeniable symbol of his devotion and his complete surrender to God. However, with this blessing also came adversity. The pain he endured was not only physical, he also had to bear the weight of skepticism and criticism. Many struggled to accept what they could not explain, and even within the Church, some accused him of fabricating the wounds. Others speculated that it was a deception meant to mislead the faithful, or even a trick orchestrated by the devil to confuse believers. To uncover the truth, the Holy See conducted multiple investigations, subjecting Padre Pio to rigorous medical examinations. Physicians studied his wounds, looking for any plausible explanation, yet none could be found. Despite remaining open and bleeding for decades, the wounds never festered, never emitted a foul odor, and never led to infection, something that went against all known medical understanding. Some doctors, after observing the phenomenon firsthand, left with more questions than answers. Regardless of the doubts surrounding him, the impact of Padre Pio on those who encountered him was undeniable. Those who sought his counsel often described an overwhelming sense of peace in his presence. Many claimed to have experienced miraculous healings or divine interventions after receiving his blessing. He was known to console the suffering with profound love and compassion, using his own pain as a way to relate to those enduring hardship. To him, the stigmata were not merely wounds, they were a reminder of Christ's sacrifice, a call to prayer, and an invitation to live a life of penance. Padre Pio never resented the suffering he endured. He saw it as a means of atonement, a way to bear the burdens of humanity's sins on his own body. He never once complained about the agony the wounds caused him. Instead, he embraced them with humility, believing that his suffering was meant to bring people closer to God. His humility and complete surrender to divine will made him one of the most revered spiritual figures of his time, and his legacy continues to inspire millions around the world. As his life neared its final chapter, something extraordinary happened. In his last months, the stigmata, which had remained on his body for 5 decades, began to fade. The wounds that had been ever present for so many years started to close, and by the time he took his final breath on September 23, 1968, they had completely disappeared. His skin was left unblemished, as if the wounds had never been there at all. For many, this was the last miracle of his life, one final act of divine intervention that sealed his extraordinary journey with a message of hope and renewal. Even after his passing, Padre Pio remains a powerful symbol of holiness and unwavering devotion. His stigmata, though once a mystery to many, now serve as a testament to his immense love for Christ and for humanity. Padre Pio often spoke of the power of prayer, particularly the Holy Rosary, which he called the sword against evil. But for him, this was not just a symbolic phrase, it was a deep conviction. Prayer, especially devotion to the Rosary, was not an occasional act of faith, but rather a necessity for strengthening the soul and resisting the temptations of the world. He believed it to be the most powerful spiritual weapon a Christian could wield. From a young age, Padre Pio developed the habit of praying the Rosary multiple times a day. As his spiritual gifts became more evident, his devotion to it only intensified. It is said that he prayed as many as 35 full rosaries daily, spending countless hours immersed in prayer. While many found such a feat unimaginable, those who lived around him confirmed that even while carrying out his daily responsibilities or attending to the faithful, his heart and mind remained fixed on the Virgin Mary through the Rosary. His insistence on praying the Rosary stemmed from his understanding of the spiritual battles that took place beyond human sight. He was well aware of the temptations and deceptions that plagued the world and had personally experienced attacks from the devil, both physically and spiritually. Many times he spoke of how the enemy tried to torment him, attempting to steer him away from his mission. Yet, whenever he sensed evil near, he turned to his greatest defense, the Rosary. For him, it was not just a form of devotion, but a direct line to divine protection, capable of shielding souls from sin and bringing peace to troubled hearts. Those who sought his spiritual guidance often received the same piece of advice: pray the Rosary every single day. It did not matter what difficulties they were facing: illness, financial struggles, family crises. Padre Pio assured them that through prayer they would find strength and guidance. He never presented the Rosary as a magical solution, but rather as a way of drawing closer to God and opening one's heart to His grace. Even in his final days, when his body was frail and his voice barely audible, he could still be seen holding his Rosary, whispering prayers as he had done every day of his life. When he passed away, he did so with his Rosary in hand, a final testament to how vital this prayer had been to him. Padre Pio did not merely recommend praying the Rosary, he taught people how to do so with purpose. He emphasized that it was not about mindlessly reciting words, but about truly meditating on the mysteries of Christ and the Virgin Mary's lives. He often said that every Hail Mary was a strike against the forces of evil, and that every Our Father built a bridge connecting the soul to God. Over the years, countless individuals followed his advice, and many shared testimonies of how their lives were transformed. The sick found relief, Those in distress received unexpected answers, and broken families found peace. Padre Pio never promised instant miracles, but he assured that consistent and heartfelt prayer would open the doors to God's mercy. His devotion to prayer continues to inspire millions today. Around the world, people have embraced the practice of daily rosary prayer, following the example he set during his lifetime. His words still echo, "Pray, pray a lot." The Virgin has never rejected a prayer made through the rosary. Among the many astonishing prophecies of Padre Pio, one of the most shocking was his precise prediction of a woman's death, a revelation that not only showcased his gift of foresight, but also demonstrated his deep concern for the salvation of souls. It all began when a woman, overwhelmed with worry about her health, decided to send a letter to the monastery in San Giovanni Rotondo, asking for prayers. She had heard of the miracles and extraordinary abilities of Padre Pio, and though she was uncertain if he was truly a saint, she felt an unshakable need to reach out to him. Her letter was received by a young friar who, moved by her desperation, personally handed it to Padre Pio. However, as soon as he mentioned the woman's case, Padre Pio displayed no surprise. It was as though he already knew her fate. Without hesitation, he gave a solemn response. "Tell her to focus more on saving her soul than curing her body because she has only 1 month left to live." The friar was shocked. How could Padre Pio know something so specific without ever having met the woman or knowing her medical history? Yet, despite his disbelief, he delivered the message. Upon hearing the response, the woman was in shock. At first, she struggled to accept that her time was so short, but eventually, she made peace with it. Rather than succumbing to fear, she dedicated her final days to prayer, embracing her faith as never before. Though her body grew weaker, her spirit became stronger, and in the end, she passed away exactly as Padre Pio had foretold, at peace, prepared to meet God. She was no longer filled with fear. Instead, an overwhelming sense of peace embraced her. Accepting her fate with serenity, she spent her remaining days in deep prayer, preparing herself for what lay beyond this life. Exactly 1 month after receiving Padre Pio's message, she took her final breath in the comfort of her home, surrounded by the people she loved most. Her passing was not one of sorrow, but one of grace. She had made peace with her destiny and met it with unwavering faith. Her husband, profoundly moved by what had transpired, felt an immense need to express his gratitude. Without hesitation, he set out on a journey to San Giovanni Rotondo, determined to thank Padre Pio in person. When he finally stood before him, tears welled in his eyes as he spoke. He explained how his wife had been able to spiritually prepare for her departure, how she had passed away in a state of grace, free of fear and regret. His voice trembled as he thanked Padre Pio for his message, which had given her the chance to find peace before her final moments. Padre Pio, in his characteristic humility, merely offered a gentle smile and responded with simple yet profound words. God's mercy always arrives in time for those who seek it with sincerity. This event left an indelible mark on all who heard about it. How could Padre Pio have known the exact moment this woman's time on earth would end? Some believed it was a divine gift, an extraordinary connection with God that allowed him to see beyond the present. Others thought that his life of intense prayer and sacrifice made him a vessel for receiving heavenly revelations. Whatever the explanation, this was not the only time Padre Pio had foretold someone's passing with stunning accuracy. Throughout his life, numerous accounts emerged of people who had received similar warnings from him, warnings that allowed them to prepare spiritually before their final moments. But for Padre Pio, death was not an end, it was a transition, a passage into the fullness of life with God. That is why he always emphasized the importance of being at peace with one's soul, living a life aligned with faith, and maintaining a state of grace. His mission was never just to predict the future. It was to help souls find their way to salvation. Today, this story serves as a powerful reminder of the fragile nature of life. None of us know the day or the hour when we will be called beyond this world. However, those who place their trust in God, live with faith, and prepare their souls have nothing to fear. As Padre Pio once said, death is not a punishment, it is the passage into eternity with God. One of the most remarkable examples of his prophetic gift involved a young woman who found herself standing at a crossroads, torn between two very different paths. She struggled with a profound decision. Should she commit to marriage and start a family, or should she devote her entire life to serving God through religious vocation? The uncertainty weighed heavily on her heart. She felt drawn toward spiritual life, yet a deep fear of making the wrong choice left her feeling lost. Encouraged by a close friend, she decided to make the journey to San Giovanni Rotondo to seek Padre Pio's guidance. She had heard countless accounts of his ability to read souls, of the way he could see what others could not. Still, a part of her feared that his answer might not align with what she secretly hoped to hear. Upon arriving at the monastery, she waited patiently in the long line of those who wished to confess to Padre Pio. She knew that inside the confessional, she would not only find forgiveness, but possibly receive the divine clarity she desperately sought. When her turn finally came, she knelt before him, prepared to express her doubts. But before she could utter a single word, Padre Pio looked at her with warmth and spoke with certainty. "Do not be afraid. Your path has already been written. You must stay by your brother's side, he will need you." Her heart pounded. How could Padre Pio have known that she had a brother, let alone that he was also contemplating a religious calling? She had not mentioned it to anyone at the monastery. Still unsure, she hesitated, explaining that her brother had not yet made a final decision. But Padre Pio simply nodded and reassured her. "He will become a priest, and you will have a mission alongside him. God has chosen both of you." With her thoughts racing, she left the confessional and spent days reflecting on his words. Could her brother truly be destined for the priesthood? Though uncertain, she decided to trust the holy friar's wisdom. From that moment forward, she dedicated herself to deepening her prayer life and supporting her brother's spiritual journey. Over time, she witnessed him drawing closer and closer to his calling. Then, in 1960, her brother was officially ordained as a priest, just as Padre Pio had foretold. Yet the prophecy did not end there. The friar's words had not only predicted her brother's path, but also her own. Her mission, as he had said, was not just to follow God, but to walk alongside her brother in his ministry. Together, they dedicated their lives to serving others, offering guidance, faith, and hope to those in need. In a small church in Italy, they worked side by side, bringing light to their community and fulfilling the divine purpose that had been destined for them. Years later, the woman once again traveled to San Giovanni Rotondo. This time, she did not come seeking answers, but to express her gratitude. Kneeling before Padre Pio, she told him, "You were right. My brother is a priest, and I have found my purpose in life." Padre Pio smiled gently and replied, "God never makes mistakes." This story is yet another testament to how Padre Pio's gift was never about mere predictions. It was about guiding people toward their true calling, the path God had intended for them. Making life-changing decisions often comes with fear and doubt, but this account serves as a reminder that when we entrust ourselves to God with faith and humility, He always reveals the way forward. Padre Pio always emphasized the power of prayer and trust in God's plan. He taught that true discernment is not about choosing what we want, but about aligning ourselves with what God has already prepared for us. This story serves as an inspiration to those struggling with major life decisions, reinforcing that every person has a divine purpose, whether it is in marriage, priesthood, religious life, or another path that serves God's will. His ability to see beyond the present was extraordinary, but his greatest gift was not simply foreseeing the future, it was giving souls the clarity they needed to embrace their true calling. Another remarkable instance of Padre Pio's prophetic warnings involved an Italian businessman named Luciano. A man of success and rational thinking, Luciano was not one to rely on intuition or superstition. However, after hearing countless stories of Padre Pio's spiritual gifts, curiosity led him to San Giovanni Rotondo. After attending one of Padre Pio's masses, he waited for his turn to receive a blessing before heading home. When he finally stood before the friar, Padre Pio fixed his eyes upon him with a serious expression and spoke only a few words. "My son, drive slowly." Luciano felt a shiver run down his spine. He didn't understand why the friar had given him such a specific warning, but he nodded respectfully and promised to be cautious. As he walked toward his car, doubts crept into his mind. Had Padre Pio seen something that he could not? Though he wasn't superstitious, the friar's words stayed with him. Deciding it was best to heed the advice, he drove carefully on his journey home. Then, as he passed through a small town, a child suddenly darted into the road. Because he was driving slowly, Luciano was able to stop in time. If he had been traveling at his usual speed, tragedy would have been unavoidable. Stunned, he realized the full weight of Padre Pio's warning. If he had ignored it, that child would have lost their life. Overcome with gratitude, he returned to San Giovanni Rotondo the next day to thank the friar. Padre Pio simply smiled and replied, "It wasn't me. It was God. I was only his instrument." This story, like so many others, reminds us that sometimes divine guidance comes in unexpected ways. Faith, trust, and obedience can mean the difference between life and death. And even when we do not understand his plans, God always leads us in the right direction. From an early age, Padre Pio cultivated a deep devotion to prayer, especially the Rosary, which he considered an essential part of his spiritual life. He never saw it as just a simple religious practice, but as a powerful weapon against evil and a bridge that connected the soul to God. As the years passed and his spiritual gifts became more evident, his dedication to the Rosary intensified to an extraordinary degree. It is said that he prayed as many as 35 complete rosaries each day, spending countless hours immersed in prayer. To many, this seemed almost impossible. How could a man so occupied with confessions, Mass, and guiding the faithful find the time to pray so many rosaries? Yet, those who were closest to him attested that even while carrying out his daily responsibilities, his heart and mind remained firmly fixed on the Virgin Mary through this sacred prayer. It was as if every moment of his life was intertwined with devotion, and his connection to God never wavered, no matter what he was doing. The reason for his insistence on praying the Rosary was clear. Padre Pio understood that the world was filled with temptations, spiritual trials, and attacks from dark forces. He had personally experienced many encounters with the enemy, both physically and spiritually. He often shared accounts of how the devil tormented him, trying to lead him away from his mission. Yet, every time he felt the presence of evil creeping near, he turned to his greatest defense, the Rosary. For him, this was not just a form of worship, but an impenetrable shield, a force capable of protecting the soul, saving sinners, and bringing peace to troubled hearts. Those who sought his spiritual counsel frequently received the same advice: pray the Rosary every single day. It did not matter whether they were suffering from illness, financial hardship, personal loss, or family struggles. Padre Pio assured them that the answer was always found in prayer. But he did not preach this because he believed in miracles occurring instantly or by chance. Rather, he knew that true devotion opened the heart to God's grace and allowed the Virgin Mary to intercede on behalf of those in need. His devotion to the Rosary remained unwavering until his final moments. Even when his body became frail and his voice was barely more than a whisper, he could still be seen with his Rosary clasped in his hands. As he lay on his deathbed, his final breaths were spent in prayer, his lips moving in a silent recitation of the Rosary. It was a testimony to how essential this devotion had been to him throughout his life. But Padre Pio did not merely encourage people to pray the rosary, he taught them how to do so with true purpose. He emphasized that it was not about mindlessly repeating words, but about deeply meditating on the mysteries of Christ and the Virgin Mary. He often explained that every Hail Mary was a strike against the forces of darkness, and that every Our Father was a step toward a stronger connection with God. Over the years, thousands of people took his words to heart. Many who followed his advice and made the rosary a part of their daily lives shared testimonies of profound transformations. Some found relief from illness, others received unexpected blessings, and many struggling families regained peace and unity. Padre Pio never promised immediate miracles, but he did promise that sincere and consistent prayer would open the doors to God's infinite mercy. Even after his passing, his words continue to inspire millions around the world. Devotion to the Rosary, largely influenced by his example, has remained a vital practice for many believers. His teachings on prayer still echo. Pray, pray a lot. The Virgin has never rejected a prayer made through the Rosary. These words remain as relevant today as they were during his lifetime, serving as a guiding light for those who seek comfort, protection, and faith in the midst of life's storms. Among the many astonishing prophecies Padre Pio made, one of the most striking was his prediction of a woman's passing, a revelation that not only displayed his ability to see beyond the present, but also highlighted his deep concern for the salvation of souls. The story began when a woman, overwhelmed with worry about her health, decided to write a letter to the monastery of San Giovanni Rotondo, asking for prayers. She had heard countless stories of Padre Pio's miraculous abilities and extraordinary insight. Though she was unsure if he was truly a living saint, she felt an undeniable pull to reach out to him in her time of need. Her letter was received by a young Franciscan friar serving at the convent. Moved by her plea for help, he decided to deliver it personally to Padre Pio. However, as soon as the friar mentioned the woman's case, Padre Pio showed no sign of surprise. It was as if he already knew who she was and what her fate would be. Without hesitation, he responded firmly, "Tell her to worry more about saving her soul than curing her body, because she has only 1 month to live." The friar was stunned. How could Padre Pio know something so precise without ever meeting the woman or being aware of her medical condition? Still, despite his shock, he followed orders and relayed the message to the woman's family. When she received the response, she was in disbelief. Like anyone, she struggled to accept the idea that her life was coming to an end so soon. Fear and anxiety gripped her. But as she reflected on Padre Pio's words, she realized that his warning was not meant to frighten her. It was a call to prepare her soul. Determined to face her final days with faith, rather than fear, she chose to follow his guidance. She put aside worldly distractions and dedicated her remaining time to prayer. She prayed the rosary with devotion, made a heartfelt confession, and fully reconciled with her faith. As her health rapidly declined, her spirit seemed to grow stronger. Her family watched as a transformation took place. She no longer displayed fear of the unknown. Instead, she radiated a sense of peace and acceptance, embracing her fate with serenity. Exactly 1 month after receiving Padre Pio's message, she passed away at home, surrounded by her loved ones. Her husband, profoundly moved by what had transpired, felt compelled to make a pilgrimage to San Giovanni Rotondo. He needed to personally thank Padre Pio for the warning that had allowed his wife to depart from this world in a state of grace. When he finally stood before the friar, tears streamed down his face as he spoke. He described how, thanks to the message, his wife had found peace, had prepared her soul, and had passed on without fear. Padre Pio, with his characteristic humility, simply smiled and replied, "God's mercy always arrives in time for those who seek it with sincerity." This story left a deep impression on all who heard it. How had Padre Pio known with such precision how much time she had left? Some believed it was a divine gift, a special connection with God that allowed him to see beyond the present. Others thought that his life of prayer and sacrifice had made him a vessel for receiving heavenly revelations. What is certain is that this was not an isolated incident. Throughout his lifetime, many testimonies surfaced from individuals who had been warned by Padre Pio about their fate. Some were given the opportunity to prepare their souls before departing, ensuring that they met God with peace in their hearts. For Padre Pio, death was never something to be feared. He saw it as a transition into eternal life with God. That is why he constantly urged people to live in a state of grace, to be at peace with their Creator, and to always be prepared for the unknown. His mission was not just to foresee the future, but to guide souls toward salvation. Even today, this story serves as a powerful reminder that life is fragile, and none of us know the day or hour when we will be called beyond this world. But those who trust in God and live with faith have nothing to fear. As Padre Pio once said, "Death is not a punishment, it is the passage into eternity with God." To Padre Pio, death was never the end, it was merely the beginning of true life, the passage into eternity where the soul would finally unite with God. This is why he always emphasized the importance of being at peace with one's soul, seeking forgiveness, and living in a state of grace. His divine mission was not simply to predict the future, but to guide souls onto the path of salvation, ensuring they were prepared for their ultimate journey. The story of the woman he forewarned about her death serves as a powerful reminder of how fragile life truly is. None of us know the exact day or hour when we will be called beyond this world, but those who trust in God and prepare their hearts with faith have nothing to fear. As Padre Pio once profoundly stated, death is not a punishment, it is the passage into eternity with God. One of the most extraordinary examples of his prophetic gift involved a young woman at a pivotal moment in her life. She found herself trapped between two conflicting desires, one leading her toward marriage and family life, and the other pulling her toward a religious vocation, dedicating herself entirely to God. The uncertainty weighed heavily on her heart, leaving her paralyzed with fear that she might choose the wrong path. Encouraged by a friend, she resolved to visit San Giovanni Rotondo, hoping that Padre Pio could provide the clarity she so desperately sought. She had heard countless stories of his ability to read souls, his deep connection to the divine, and his extraordinary insights. However, part of her hesitated. What if his answer was not the one she hoped for? Upon reaching the monastery, she joined the long line of people waiting to confess their sins. She understood that the confessional was not only a place to receive forgiveness, but also a sacred space where, perhaps, she would find the sign she needed. Finally, the moment arrived. She knelt before Padre Pio, ready to express her doubts. But before she could even utter a word, he gazed at her with kindness and spoke with certainty. "Do not be afraid. Your path is already written. You must stay by your brother's side, he will need you." She was stunned. How could Padre Pio know that her brother was also contemplating a religious calling? She had never mentioned it to anyone at the monastery. Filled with doubt, she tried to explain that her brother had not yet made a final decision, but Padre Pio gently reaffirmed his prophecy. "He will become a priest, and you will have a mission alongside him. God has chosen you both." Her mind raced. Could it be true? Was her brother truly destined for the priesthood? Though still uncertain, she chose to trust Padre Pio's words. When she returned home, she committed herself to prayer and began supporting her brother in his spiritual journey. As time passed, she witnessed him draw closer and closer to his calling. Then, in 1960, her brother was officially ordained as a priest, just as Padre Pio had foretold. But the prophecy had not only predicted her brother's path, it had also revealed her own. Her mission was not to enter the convent, but to stand by her brother's side, assisting him in his pastoral work. Together, they dedicated their lives to serving others. In a small church in Italy, they worked tirelessly to help those in need, offering guidance, faith, and compassion to their community. It was a purpose greater than she had ever imagined, and it had been laid out before her by Padre Pio. Years later, she once again journeyed to San Giovanni Rotondo. This time, she did not come seeking answers, but to express gratitude. As she knelt before Padre Pio, she told him, "You were right. My brother is a priest, and I have found my purpose in life." Padre Pio smiled gently and replied, "God never makes mistakes." This story is just one of many that demonstrate how Padre Pio's prophetic gifts were never about predicting the future for the sake of spectacle. His purpose was always to help souls recognize their true calling and align their lives with God's divine plan. For many, making decisions about the future is often clouded with fear and uncertainty. This young woman's journey reminds us that when we surrender ourselves to God with faith and humility, He will always reveal the right path. Padre Pio frequently emphasized the necessity of prayer and trust in God. He taught that true discernment is not about seeking what we desire, but about aligning ourselves with what God has prepared for us. His teachings serve as a timeless reminder that every person has a divine purpose, whether it be marriage, priesthood, religious life, or any other path through which they can serve the Lord. The key is to listen, trust, and be willing to follow His will, even when it is not immediately clear. Padre Pio possessed a remarkable ability to see beyond the surface, but his true gift was not simply foreseeing events. It was giving each soul the guidance they needed to fulfill their God-given purpose. Another incredible account of his prophetic warnings involved an Italian businessman named Luciano. A man of logic and practicality, Luciano was not easily swayed by superstition. However, after hearing endless accounts of Padre Pio's spiritual gifts, curiosity led him to San Giovanni Rotondo. After attending Mass, he waited for his turn to receive a blessing before departing. When he finally stood before the friar, Padre Pio looked at him with deep intensity and, with a serious expression, said just a few words, "My son, drive slowly." A chill ran down Luciano's spine. The statement was so direct, so unexpected, that it unsettled him. He had no reason to believe he was in danger, yet he nodded respectfully and assured the friar he would be careful. As he walked toward his car, doubt crept into his mind. Had Padre Pio seen something that he himself could not? Though he wasn't typically superstitious, the friar's words lingered in his thoughts. Deciding it was best to heed the warning, he drove cautiously on his journey home, keeping his speed lower than usual. Then, as he passed through a small town, a child suddenly ran into the street. Because he had been driving slowly, Luciano was able to stop in time. If he had been traveling at his usual speed, there would have been no way to prevent a tragedy. Shaken, he realized the true weight of Padre Pio's warning. If he had dismissed it, that child would have lost their life. Overcome with emotion, Luciano knew he could not return home without first expressing his gratitude. The next day, he went back to see Padre Pio. This time, he did not come as a skeptic, but as a man humbled by the experience. With tears in his eyes, he knelt before the friar and thanked him for saving both his life and the child's. Padre Pio simply smiled and said, "It wasn't me, it was God. I was only His instrument." This event left a lasting mark on Luciano. Until that moment, he had never believed in someone's ability to foresee the future, but his experience convinced him that Padre Pio possessed a gift beyond human understanding. Throughout his life, Padre Pio gave countless similar warnings to individuals unknowingly facing danger. Some avoided fatal accidents, while others changed the course of their lives altogether. But in every instance, his words were always meant for the good of others, never for his own benefit. For Padre Pio, his gifts were not a source of pride or spectacle. He never sought fame or recognition. Everything he did with humility, knowing that he was merely a servant of God. This story teaches an important lesson. There are moments in life when we must be attentive to signs, even if we do not immediately understand them. Faith and obedience can mean the difference between life and death, and trusting in God's divine plan will always lead us in the right direction. Even today, this story remains a powerful testimony to the strength of faith and how, through Padre Pio, many lives were safeguarded from unseen dangers. Upon returning to his base, the American pilot could not shake the vision that had unfolded before him. Overwhelmed by the experience, he reported the event to his superiors, who were both intrigued and skeptical. Determined to investigate further, they presented him with a photograph of Padre Pio. Without hesitation, the pilot identified him as the same friar he had seen suspended in the sky, preventing him from completing his bombing mission. This revelation astounded those who heard it, especially considering that, during the days of the attack, Padre Pio had never left the monastery of San Giovanni Rotondo. How could he have been seen in the skies over Italy at that precise moment? This was just one of many accounts that suggested Padre Pio possessed a mysterious ability by location, the phenomenon of being in two places at once. Another extraordinary testimony came from an Italian army officer who had been gravely wounded on the battlefield. As he lay in agony, believing his end was near, he suddenly saw Padre Pio approach him. The friar gently placed a hand on his chest and spoke reassuringly, "Do not be afraid. You will be safe soon." A few hours later, the wounded officer was miraculously rescued by his fellow soldiers and taken to a hospital. As he recovered, he could not stop thinking about the friar who had appeared to him in his most desperate moment. When he was strong enough to travel, he made a pilgrimage to San Giovanni Rotondo, longing to express his gratitude in person. When he finally stood before Padre Pio and thanked him for saving his life, the friar simply smiled and humbly replied, "My son, you do not need to thank me, but God." But Padre Pio's bilocation was not limited to times of war or to rescuing those in danger. Many people suffering from serious illnesses reported that, while lying in their hospital beds, they had seen him appear in their rooms, offering them comfort, prayers, and strength. Inexplicably, even though he had never physically left the monastery, individuals from different parts of the world claimed to have seen him standing in churches, attending prayer gatherings, or even appearing in their homes. Even within the Vatican, there were astonishing accounts of Padre Pio's bilocation. It is said that on one occasion, he appeared in the private office of Pope Pius Roman XII, delivering a message regarding crucial decisions that would impact the future of the Church. This extraordinary event was shared by members of the Pope's inner circle, who stated that the pontiff had been deeply moved by the unexpected visit from the friar, one that, according to all records, had never physically occurred. However, bilocation was not the only extraordinary mystery that surrounded Padre Pio. He was also known for his remarkable ability to read hearts, a divine gift that allowed him to perceive a person's sins, struggles, and concerns before they ever spoke a word. In the confessional, penitents often found themselves shaken by what they experienced. Many entered hesitant, believing they would need to explain their wrongdoings in detail, only to discover that Padre Pio already knew. He would gently reveal details about their lives that only they themselves could have known. Some were left speechless, others moved to tears, but all left with renewed souls, convinced they had encountered the grace of God. Another unexplained phenomenon surrounding him was the heavenly fragrance that many reported sensing in his presence. Those who stood near him described an overwhelming, sweet scent similar to roses or violets that would linger even when no flowers were present. The aroma was not just confined to his immediate surroundings, but was also reported to emanate from his gloves, his clothing, and even the locations where he had prayed. For many, this was an unmistakable sign of holiness, a divine confirmation of the sanctity that surrounded him. Yet, perhaps the most extraordinary thing about all of these gifts was how Padre Pio used them. He never saw them as abilities to be displayed for attention, nor did he seek recognition or admiration. To him, everything that happened was purely the work of God, not his own doing. Though science has never been able to explain bilocation or any of the other remarkable occurrences linked to Padre Pio, the sheer volume of testimonies and the consistency of the accounts make them difficult to dismiss. Millions of people believe that Padre Pio's connection to the divine transcended the limits of time and space. Even after his passing, his presence has continued to be felt by many. There are countless stories of individuals who, in moments of despair, have experienced an unexplainable sense of comfort, as if the friar himself were near, offering them strength. Some claim to have received signs or assistance in moments of great need, leading them to believe that Padre Pio's mission of intercession did not end with his earthly life, but continues from beyond. From an early age, Padre Pio's experiences with the supernatural shaped his life and his deep connection to God. He often described how, as a child, he had visions of Jesus, the Virgin Mary, and his guardian angel with an ease that others could hardly comprehend. To him, these were not dreams or illusions, but real manifestations of the divine world. Unlike most people who grow up hearing of faith without directly witnessing it, Padre Pio had been immersed in the spiritual realm from the very beginning. He felt certain that his life had been destined for something greater, that God had a special mission for him. As he grew in his religious life, these encounters became even more profound. During moments of deep prayer and meditation, Christ would appear to him, offering wisdom, strengthening his spirit, and preparing him for the immense suffering that awaited him. On several occasions, Padre Pio described how Jesus revealed to him the state of souls, urging him to pray for sinners and intercede on their behalf. He understood that he had been entrusted with a sacred duty to help guide lost souls toward redemption. However, not all of his visions were comforting. Many times he witnessed Christ's suffering in excruciating detail. He saw Jesus covered in blood, his body torn by the wounds of the Passion, carrying the weight of the cross. Padre Pio did not simply witness these moments, he felt them. He experienced the pain of the crucifixion within his own body, as if he were enduring a portion of Christ's agony. These experiences were so intense that they often left him physically exhausted, sometimes even causing him to faint from the overwhelming burden of what he had witnessed. Beyond his devotion to Jesus, Padre Pio had an unbreakable bond with the Virgin Mary, whom he lovingly referred to as my mother. He frequently spoke of how she would appear to him in times of great anguish, bringing him comfort and strength. In his writings, he revealed that Mary had assured him of her protection, promising that she would always stand beside him in his battle against the forces of darkness. One of the most pivotal moments of his life occurred in 1918, when he received the stigmata. According to Padre Pio, shortly before the wounds appeared on his body, he had a vision of the crucified Christ. The suffering he experienced in that moment was indescribable. He felt nails piercing his hands and feet, leaving him marked with the same wounds that Christ bore on the cross. But Jesus and the Virgin Mary were not the only divine beings who played a role in Padre Pio's life. Since childhood, he had an extraordinary relationship with his guardian angel. Unlike many who simply believe in angels but never perceive them, Padre Pio not only saw his angel but spoke to him with complete trust. He often recounted how his guardian angel would protect him from demonic attacks, especially at night, when the forces of evil tried to torment him. His angel also served as a messenger, carrying his prayers to heaven and even delivering responses. What made this even more remarkable was that Padre Pio encouraged others to strengthen their own relationship with their guardian angels. He insisted that every person had one, though most people ignored their presence. He urged the faithful to speak to their angels, seek their guidance, and trust in their divine protection, assuring them that these celestial beings were always watching over them, even if they could not be seen. Padre Pio's life was one of extraordinary grace, suffering, and mystery. Through his supernatural gifts, he touched the lives of countless individuals, guiding them closer to God, offering them hope, and reminding them that faith is not just a belief, it is a living force that can transcend the boundaries of time and space. Padre Pio's visions were not merely isolated experiences. They served as a divine bridge between heaven and earth. He never sought admiration or recognition for these extraordinary gifts, as he firmly believed that everything he experienced was the work of God. His only mission was to serve others, guiding them toward salvation. Even in his final days, his celestial encounters did not cease. It is said that on the eve of his passing, he was granted one last vision, one of immense spiritual significance. He saw two mothers standing before him, the Virgin Mary and his earthly mother, Maria Giuseppa. This profound revelation was understood as a message that his earthly journey was coming to an end, and that he was soon to be welcomed into heaven. Padre Pio's supernatural experiences remain a mystery to many, but for those who believe, they serve as undeniable proof of his deep connection to the divine. His legacy is a powerful reminder that faith is not just an abstract concept, but a living reality, filled with miracles, divine manifestations, and profound spiritual encounters for those who open their hearts to God. The spiritual battles of Padre Pio, a war between good and evil. From a young age, Padre Pio was subjected to intense spiritual attacks, a relentless battle between the forces of good and evil that would follow him throughout his life. Although he was a man of deep faith and devotion, this did not exempt him from the enemy's desperate attempts to weaken, confuse, and make him abandon his mission. Unlike ordinary temptations that many people experience, his encounters with dark forces were terrifying, physical, and relentless. They tested not only his faith, but also his physical endurance. The first signs of this battle appeared when he was still a child. At night, threatening shadows would materialize in his room, whispering words of fear and doubt, trying to unsettle his heart. More than once, he awoke with a chilling sensation that he was being watched by something unseen. The air would turn icy, and an unnatural heaviness would fill the space. However, even as a boy, he understood that the most powerful weapon against evil was prayer. Every time he felt a sinister presence, he would cling to his rosary and pray with unwavering faith. As he grew older and deepened his spiritual life, the attacks became even more violent. The enemy no longer limited itself to whispering doubts or creating eerie sensations, it began to physically assault him. On multiple occasions, Padre Pio was found with bruises, scratches, and inexplicable wounds on his body. He himself recounted how, at night, invisible entities would strike him, throw him to the ground, and attempt to break his spirit. One of the most shocking incidents occurred at San Giovanni Rotondo. One night, the other friars in the monastery heard him screaming in agony. Rushing to his room, they found him lying on the floor, his face bloodied, his robe torn, and his body covered in marks. When they asked him what had happened, he responded with remarkable calm. "The devil cannot stand that I pray for souls. That is why he attacks me." However, the assaults were not only physical, the enemy also sought to weaken his mind and faith. The devil would disguise himself in dreams, taking the form of angels, priests, or even holy figures, attempting to deceive him into believing his mission was a mistake. One of the most chilling encounters he described was when Satan appeared before him in the form of Christ, surrounded by a dazzling light. For a brief moment, Padre Pio was almost deceived, but then, as he examined the figure more closely, he noticed something unsettling the eyes. Unlike the gaze of the true Christ, which radiated infinite love and peace, this figure's eyes were filled with arrogance and malice. In that moment, Padre Pio understood that it was a deception. Without hesitation, he declared, "Begone, Satan! My Lord would never ask me to doubt his will." The false Christ immediately vanished, unable to withstand the power of his unwavering faith. Despite enduring these relentless attacks, Padre Pio never allowed himself to be defeated. He took refuge in prayer, the Eucharist, and his deep devotion to the Virgin Mary. He often said that every suffering offered to God had a purpose, and that evil could only have power over those who invited it in. What was most extraordinary about Padre Pio was his attitude toward these spiritual battles. He never considered himself a victim, nor did he allow fear to consume him. Instead, he saw these attacks as confirmation that his mission was crucial and that the enemy was growing desperate to stop him. Guiding others in spiritual warfare, Padre Pio did not keep his struggles to himself. He taught the faithful how to resist temptations and protect themselves from spiritual attacks. He insisted that the best defense was frequent confession, receiving the Eucharist regularly, constant prayer, especially the Rosary. He often said, "The devil cannot stand the power of the Rosary or the humility of a soul that surrenders completely to God." Throughout his life, these battles never ceased, but neither did his devotion. Until his final breath, he continued to pray, celebrate Mass, and guide souls to God, proving that no darkness is stronger than divine light. His story stands as a testament that the spiritual life is not without challenges, but those who trust fully in God will always triumph. Today, his legacy continues to inspire millions to strengthen their faith, endure hardships, and recognize that prayer is the most powerful weapon against any evil. The canonization of Padre Pio, a saint for the modern world. The canonization of Padre Pio was one of the most anticipated and significant moments in modern Catholic history. Since his passing on September 23, 1968, millions of faithful already venerated him as a living saint. His extraordinary life of prayer, suffering, and unwavering devotion left such a profound impact that calls for his canonization began almost immediately. However, the Church follows a rigorous process before declaring someone a saint. While popular devotion and testimonies of faith are considered, concrete proof of miracles and heroic virtue is required. In 1982, the Vatican officially opened Padre Pio's beatification process. A team of priests, theologians, and doctors spent years reviewing his writings, testimonies of his holiness, documented miracles attributed to his intercession. One of the most intensely scrutinized aspects was his stigmata. After decades of research, the Church concluded that there was no medical explanation for the wounds. Finally, on May 2, 1999, Pope John Paul Roman II proclaimed Padre Pio blessed. The event was historic. Over 500,000 people attended the ceremony in St. Peter's Square, an unprecedented number. Pope John Paul Roman II had a special connection to Padre Pio. In 1947, as a young priest, Karol Wojtyla had traveled to San Giovanni Rotondo to confess to him. During that encounter, Padre Pio made a shocking revelation. He predicted that Wojtyla would one day become pope. In 2002, the final miracle needed for his canonization was confirmed. A 7-year-old Italian boy named Matteo Colella, who had been on the brink of death from fulminant meningitis, miraculously recovered after prayers for Padre Pio's intercession. With no scientific explanation for his survival, the Church recognized it as a miracle. Thus, on June 16, 2002, Padre Pio was officially canonized as Saint Pio of Pietrelcina. Today, his legacy continues to inspire millions, proving that faith, prayer, and total surrender to God can transform lives, overcome evil, and bring divine miracles into the world. This miracle was the final confirmation. The Church needed to officially recognize Padre Pio as a saint. After decades of investigations, testimonies, and profound devotion from the faithful, the moment the world had been waiting for finally arrived. On June 16, 2002, Pope John Paul Roman II declared Padre Pio of Pietrelcina a saint in one of the largest canonization ceremonies in the history of the Catholic Church. It is estimated that more than 300,000 people gathered in St. Peter's Square to witness this sacred moment, a testimony to the deep love and admiration people held for him. What had long been believed by the faithful was now formally acknowledged. Padre Pio was a saint. During his homily, Pope John Paul Roman II emphasized the defining qualities of Padre Pio's life: his profound humility, unwavering love for the Eucharist, and his willingness to embrace suffering as a path to Christ. The Pope described him as a witness to God's infinite mercy, a living example of how faith, prayer, and love can transform lives and bring people closer to the divine. A saint for the world, Padre Pio's enduring legacy. Following his canonization, devotion to Padre Pio spread even further. San Giovanni Rotondo became one of the most visited pilgrimage sites in the world, attracting millions of visitors each year. His tomb, the cell where he lived, and the very places where he bore the stigmata are now considered sacred sites where the faithful gather to seek his intercession, offer prayers, and reflect on his extraordinary life. Beyond his spiritual impact, Padre Pio's legacy of charity continues. The hospital he founded in 1956, Casa Salivo della Sofferenza, remains one of the most important medical centers in Italy. True to his vision, it not only provides physical healing, but also offers compassionate care rooted in faith. Each year, thousands of patients receive medical treatment, and many also seek spiritual solace in the place where the saint once lived and prayed. Today, Padre Pio is venerated as the patron saint of the sick, the suffering, and those seeking God's forgiveness. His example continues to inspire millions to strengthen their faith, deepen their trust in the power of prayer, and live with humility and love for others. Every June 16th, on the anniversary of his canonization, and every September 23rd, on the day of his passing, thousands of pilgrims gather to honor his memory and give thanks for his intercession. A saint who still speaks to the world. Through his *** life, miracles, and enduring legacy, Padre Pio reminds us that faith is not just about believing, it is about living in complete surrender to God, trusting His will even in the face of suffering and uncertainty. His story serves as a beacon of hope for all who seek comfort, healing, and a path to holiness. The spiritual battles of Padre Pio, a constant war between good and evil. From his earliest years, Padre Pio faced intense spiritual warfare, a lifelong battle between the forces of good and evil. Though he was a man of unwavering faith and relentless prayer, he was not spared from the enemy's attempts to weaken, deceive, and turn him away from his mission. His encounters with dark forces were not mere temptations, they were terrifying physical and spiritual assaults that tested his endurance and trust in God. The first signs of this struggle appeared when he was still a child. He described how, at night, shadowy figures would emerge in his room, whispering words of fear and doubt, trying to shake his faith. More than once, he woke up feeling an unnatural cold in the air and an oppressive sense that something sinister was watching him. Yet, even as a young boy, he knew that prayer was the most powerful defense. Each time he sensed a malevolent presence, he would clutch his rosary and pray fervently, refusing to give in to fear. As he grew and his spiritual gifts became stronger, the attacks intensified. The enemy no longer relied on mere whispers, it began physically tormenting him. There were numerous occasions when Padre Pio was found covered in bruises, scratches, and unexplained wounds. He described how, at night, invisible forces would throw him to the ground, beat him, and attempt to break his spirit. One of the most harrowing incidents occurred at San Giovanni Rotondo. His fellow friars were startled by his anguished cries in the middle of the night. Rushing to his room, they found him collapsed on the floor, his face bloodied, his robe torn. When they asked him what had happened, he answered calmly, "The devil cannot stand that I pray for souls. That is why he attacks me." But the attacks were not only physical, they also aimed to weaken his faith. The enemy would take on deceptive forms, appearing in his dreams as false angels, priests, or even holy figures in an effort to lead him astray. One of the most chilling encounters occurred when Satan appeared to him disguised as Christ, surrounded by a radiant light. For a moment, Padre Pio almost believed it was truly Jesus. However, as he gazed more closely, he noticed something unsettling. The figure's eyes were not filled with love, but with arrogance and malice. Realizing the deception, he immediately declared, "Get away, Satan! My Lord would never ask me to doubt his will." The false Christ vanished instantly, unable to withstand the power of Padre Pio's unwavering faith. Despite decades of relentless attacks, he never surrendered to fear or despair. Instead, he turned to prayer, the Eucharist, and his deep love for the Virgin Mary for strength. He frequently reminded others that suffering offered to God had a purpose, and that evil could only take hold of those who willingly allowed it. What made Padre Pio truly extraordinary was not just his ability to endure these trials, but his attitude toward them. He never saw himself as a victim. Instead, he believed that his struggles were proof of the importance of his mission. If the enemy was trying so hard to stop him, then he must be doing something truly meaningful, teaching others how to defend themselves spiritually. Padre Pio did not keep his battles to himself. He taught others how to resist spiritual attacks and temptations. He insisted that the best defense was frequent confession, receiving the Eucharist, praying the Rosary daily. He often said, "The devil cannot stand the power of the Rosary or the humility of a soul completely surrendered to God," a legacy that continues to inspire millions. Even in his final days, Padre Pio never wavered. He continued to pray, celebrate Mass, and guide souls, proving that no darkness is stronger than the light of God. His story is a powerful testament that the spiritual journey is not free of struggles, but those who trust in God will always prevail. Today, his legacy continues to inspire millions to strengthen their faith, resist trials, and remember that prayer is the most powerful weapon against any evil. Padre Pio, a saint for every generation. Padre Pio's legacy is not only defined by the miracles he performed or the supernatural gifts he possessed. His greatest gift was his message of faith, hope, and complete surrender to God. Through his life, he showed that holiness is not reserved for a select few. It is a path that is open to all who seek God with humility, trust, and unwavering devotion. Even today, millions turn to him in prayer, seek his intercession, and feel his presence in their lives. His message is timeless. Trust in God, live in prayer, and never lose hope. Padre Pio was not just a saint of his time, he remains a guiding light for all generations, a reminder that even in the darkest of moments, faith will always lead us home.